Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of our Susty Talk interview series. We launched this series at the start of lockdown to help all of you guys feel connected to the sustainability conversation, even though we have to be physically apart. And even though lockdown restrictions are easing, I know that a lot of you are, like myself, either working from home or on furlough at the moment. So it's always good to keep the conversation going and, in all honesty, just to have some background noise, to have some conversation in our home offices that are not with our pets. So I'm delighted to have Vicky Sins from the World Benchmarking Alliance on for our latest episode. Vicky leads on their climate benchmarking work, which I'm sure you will have seen covered on our site and elsewhere. So thank you so much, Vicky, for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I can see that you are working from home, presumably, at the moment. So it would be good to hear about how you and your team have been working during lockdown and how you found that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and hello to everyone who's listening to this. But I think from our side, we are already an organization that works virtually. So in that sense, the adjustments from working, although we have physical offices, but switching to a virtual environment wasn't that big of a transition. I think the transition was more in personal transition, where you needed to balance different priorities at the same time, such as family life, work, and that all in a limited amount of square feet. So I think a lot of people had the same challenges. I think for now, also we've seen that this lockdown has posed a lot of challenges on a personal level, on a work level. I think also for companies, for individuals. But I think it's also been an opportunity for many of us to evaluate and reflect on what we have been doing, and if we've done that in the right way, or whether or not we should. And this moment of slowdown and taking a breath is also could be used to create momentum to do something good. So I think for us it was a very good moment to first of all reflect on what the impact was, but then second of all as well to realize that this is the moment that we want to re-emphasize our work. And that's why working on the launch of our second benchmark earlier this month has been, although different because it was virtually, it was still the right moment to continue that work, and it hasn't impacted it that much, as I said, because we could continue virtually as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. So a couple of weeks before I got sent home from the office, I spoke to Gibran from the WBA, and he seemed to say the same sort of things, that this is not the moment to be backing off. This is the moment to be doubling down, to be reflecting, and to just be re-emphasizing this conversation. And specifically when we talked, what stood out was his conviction that companies with a strong sustainability culture or strong sustainability ambitions were those that were best placed to deal with lockdown and to thrive afterwards. Is that something that the rest of the Alliance team is seeing? Is that something you've seen materialise in the few months since we spoke with him?
Yeah, and I think it's good that you refer back to that conversation, because of course we went into this situation not knowing how long this would last or where we would end up. So I think for us, if you would reflect on the situation, you're right in saying that of course it depends on which industry you're at. Some industries are obviously struggling very much about the impact, but I think you see that what COVID has shown is that, especially if you look at, for example, the electric utility sector, and Britain, for example, that because of the electricity demand plummeting, you as a country went to use renewable generated electricity, and you've actually not used coal for the first time, and I think that already shows the ability of different sectors to actually speed up certain decisions, and that these decisions were maybe already part of a plan, or maybe was on the radar, but there were always certain I would say always certain excuses or maybe reasons for not to maybe phase out certain airplanes or maybe go renewable completely. But now I think if you see that a lot of countries and companies have been talking obviously about how do we build back better. So it has, for us, it has stimulated what we've seen. It stimulated the discussions for the industries, for countries. So how do we make sure that after there's a world after COVID, that we support, of course, economic activities. We need to make sure that people still can come back to a job, but we make sure that it builds back into a future that we want to see, and it's also more resilient for any future shocks coming there as well. So that's what we've seen in most industry discussions.
Mm-hmm. No, it's good to see a lot more. I think resilience is probably the buzzword of the moment, along with adaptation, and those had probably slid down the sustainability conversation recently. So it is promising to see them getting more traction.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there the Alliance's recent benchmark about electric utilities. I'm told that you played a huge role in creating this. We have coverage of this on our site, but for anyone that hasn't read it or seen about it, the top line finding was 41 of the world's biggest 50 electric utilities have not yet aligned their business models with the Paris Agreement's requirements. It's really significant because this is the sector that, for example, the transport sector and the heat sector will be relying on to align with net zero. So if we could have a bit more information about how you've seen the electric sector respond to sort of these concerns in addition to keeping their employees and suppliers healthy in the pandemic, that would be great.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for raising also the awareness of the results. For us, it's definitely the case that the outcome of the results is that we've looked at how aligned are these companies to setting targets, but definitely also their performance into reaching those targets. And yes, where we say that this is a sector that is seen as the great enabler. They need to enable other transitions in other sectors. So where we see that there are a lot of companies who have set transition plans, and I think the acknowledgement of the sector is there that transition is needed. There needs to be a phase out of the traditional ways of electricity generation. Renewables need to play a significant part of that. So I think what we've seen is that the strategic plans of companies incorporate that, but there is a significant lack of ambition in terms of reaching those targets, and also some of these, or quite a lot of these plans, are not sufficient enough to reach the Paris Agreement. And when we talk about the 2 degree, well below 2 degree world that we want to achieve, and we've used the well below 2 degree scenarios in our findings, you see that there's the overall sector performance is significantly lacking behind, and the shocking finding for us has been, and it's not my effort, it's very much a team's effort and our relationship with CDP who has made this happen. But you see that the companies need to they're currently locked in already in the emissions that they're going to have, because this is a sector that has heavy investments, it has long-term investments. So we see that a lot of these assets will still generate electricity for the years to come, and the emission that these assets will generate is actually meaning that our economies and our world is locked into these emissions for the years to come. And that is a worrying finding, because we need to make sure that the carbon budget that the sector has been allocated, they need to stay within, and definitely and they need to perform on that, because otherwise other sectors will fail to reach their targets as well.
Mm-hmm. So some quite sizable challenges there. I don't know if did you also look into some of the ways in which these businesses might seek to overcome these challenges? I know you mentioned they're just a general lack of ambition, a misalignment of funding, and just the fact that the assets already exist, and essentially if we want to stay within the carbon budget, they'd have to be bought offline or downsized before the proper end of their life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to emphasize that the reason why we do this research and publish these results is because we empower a broad set of stakeholders. So we need the companies to take the first step, and we need them to strategically buy into the renewable future or low carbon future, but we also need other stakeholders. And we need the financial services sector, including the investors, like you said, to make and enable the allocation of capital that is needed to support the transition. We need policymakers, because we see that the policy landscape provides a significant incentive in this to create a low carbon future, and these are industries that we look at. We've looked at the automotive sector, and we looked at the electric utility sector so far. These are very high regulated environments, so the policy environment plays a significant role. So we see that all these stakeholders need to contribute to this low carbon economy. And now we've measured these companies against the well below 2 degree scenarios, and we expect these scenarios that we use. These are IEA scenarios that we use because everything is scientifically backed. But these scenarios will be published in a more ambitious way, allowing us to measure the companies against the 1.5 degree scenario. But actually that means that the gap that we will probably find is going to increase. So the ambition level needs to step up, and that needs to come from the companies. The innovation and the technologies are there, so the renewables is there, but also the methodology allows or expects, the methodology that we use expects company to invest at least 5% of their EBITDA into new technologies, and this can be renewable technologies, different types of electricity generation, carbon capture storage, but also how could you bring the electricity grid in a different way. So we look at different ways of contributing to a low carbon economy, and we see that there's a large portion of the companies that is not investing enough in this. So we see that only a very small percentage of total companies is actually investing that 5%. So that is a clear call to action to the industry, is that it's not just setting ambitious targets and not just only changing to renewables, but also make sufficient investments into new business models, new technologies, because that will support us in getting to a net zero economy.
Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned that your team are really used to working remotely, and that the challenge of working in lockdown was not logistical, really. But have you seen this engagement with those kind of stakeholders changing in recent months?
I think overall the engagement has been really good, and I think what is the challenges that we do see is that we are an alliance, and we're benchmarking alliance. So that means we have currently over 150 organizations that support us in our work, and these have shown their value even more broadly during the COVID times, because you can imagine that if you want to outreach into a country or into a region or in an industry that is not specifically known to us, then you need to rely on other organizations to introduce or to build a network. And where we would normally meet, like you mentioned in our introduction call, and you would go to meeting places or conferences where you would be able to establish relationships, that of course have fallen away. So going into a region virtually and to meeting new people, that is of course a significant challenge. So, and where we do climate change has an enormous impact also on the developing world. And that's where we need to make sure that the work we do is relevant for them. Their voices are being represented in the work we do. And that's where we need our alliance to reach out to the stakeholders in those regions to have a say, and to make sure that our work is known there, and to make sure that we can generate the change and impact that we would like to see. And that takes a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm. No, there's definitely a massive difference between meeting someone in person for the first time and video calling them. I definitely say, people say it's great. It is definitely if you're already in contact with the person or friends with them, but otherwise, yes, definitely, I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with the challenge.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions that we have time for this episode. So I'd like to take the time to thank Vicky again for sparing her time to come on the call. And thank all of you guys for tuning in. Just a friendly reminder that all past episodes of our video interview series can be found on our website and on our YouTube channel, and that we will be updating them every week. So even though lockdown is easing, fear not, this will not be the last episode. So thank you so much, Vicky, for coming on for this episode.
More than welcome. Thank you.
No, thank you. And in the meantime, I hope everyone stays safe, stays well, and keeps the Susty Talk going.